John Miller lived a quiet life on the edge of the Arizona Territory, far from towns, arguments, or anything that brought trouble. His world was simple. The sound of hammer striking iron, the heat of the forge, and the smell of burning coal. He liked this routine because it didn't ask anything from him. People came, paid for their tools or horseshoes, said a few words, and left. John felt safer keeping to himself. He had been alone for years, long enough that silence felt like a companion rather than a burden. One late afternoon, the sky turned a deep gold as the sun sank behind the red hills. John had just finished repairing a rancher's broken stirrup when he noticed something unusual. In the dust outside his workshop were footprints, light, fast, spaced closely together as if made by someone running. They were not the heavy prints of a cowboy or the uneven trail of a lost traveler. These were careful steps, made by someone skilled. John knelt down, studying them. Whoever passed through didn't want to be followed, yet the prints were too fresh to ignore. He looked around, but the road was empty. The wind blew softly, carrying only the smell of dry grass. He shrugged it off, thinking it might have been a young rider or a local hunter passing through. But he felt a small shiver, the kind that told him something important had brushed close to his life. The night came quickly. The moon rose high, bright but thin, casting silver light across the workshop walls. John was cleaning his tools when he heard a sound so soft, he almost believed he imagined it a faint knock on the back door. Not a strong knock, not the kind people used when they needed help. It was cautious, uncertain, like someone testing if danger waited on the other side. John set his tools down slowly. A feeling stirred in his chest. Not fear exactly, but tension like the moment before a storm breaks. He walked to the door, unsure what he would find. When he opened it, the lantern light spilled outside, revealing a woman standing shakily on her feet. She looked no older than her mid-20s, with long dark hair braided messy over one shoulder, dust covering her clothes, and a deep cut on her arm. Her boots were worn, her breathing uneven. She did not look like someone who meant harm, she looked like someone who had been running for far too long. Her eyes lifted to meet his. They were sharp yet tired, full of fear but also strength. She spoke softly, her voice rough from exhaustion. She said her name was Nayeli, and she needed help. Not money, not food. She needed steel, something forged by fire. Something strong enough to defend herself. A blade. A tool. Anything made of iron. John felt a wave of confusion. He had been approached by many people over the years, but never by someone like her, someone who seemed to carry the weight of the night on her shoulders. At first, he wondered if she was dangerous, but her posture told a different story. She wasn't hiding her hands. She wasn't reaching for a weapon. She was simply standing there, holding her injured arm, waiting for him to decide if he would close the door or help her. For a moment, he thought about the rumors he'd heard in town. Stories about an Apache woman on the run. Some said she was a fugitive. Some said she was leading raids. Others said she was innocent. No one agreed on the truth. But one thing was clear. Bounty hunters were looking for her, and they didn't care whether she was guilty. John was not a man who liked danger. Yet something in her eyes stopped him from turning her away. Maybe it was the fear she tried to hide. Maybe it was the strength she carried even while exhausted. Or maybe it was simply that he couldn't watch someone suffer on his doorstep. He stepped aside and motioned her inside. The moment she entered, her body relaxed just a little, as though his doorway gave her a small piece of safety she hadn't felt in weeks. John fetched water and bandages, guiding her to sit near the forge, where the warmth could ease her shaking. Nayeli watched him closely, as if unsure whether she could trust his kindness, but she allowed him to clean her wound. As he worked, he noticed scars along her hands, signs of someone used to hard living. Not someone who chose violence, but someone who survived it. When he finished wrapping her arm, he asked quietly why she needed steel. Nayeli hesitated. Her gaze drifted toward the window, where the moonlight touched the desert floor. She told him in a soft, uneven voice that she wasn't a criminal. She was being hunted because someone blamed her tribe for raids they never committed. To avoid punishment that wasn't hers, she ran. She didn't want trouble for anyone, and she didn't want to bring danger to his doorstep. But she needed something to protect herself if her pursuers caught up. John listened without speaking. Something in the way she talked, not begging, not demanding, just explaining, made him believe her. She wasn't hiding anything. She wasn't playing a trick. She was simply telling the truth, the way someone who had lost everything would. He stood and walked to his forge. The fire was still warm from the day's work. Without a word, he began selecting iron pieces. Nayeli blinked, confused, then slowly understood he was going to make something for her. She watched him heat the metal until it glowed red, shaping it with steady, skilled hands. The rhythmic sound of hammering filled the workshop, strong and calm, like a heartbeat. With every strike, John felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just another tool. This was something someone's life might depend on. Nayeli observed quietly, her breathing slow, her eyes filled with something like gratitude or maybe wonder. She had been running for weeks, treated like a threat wherever she went. But here was a man who said nothing, judged nothing, and simply helped her because she was hurt and alone. When John finished the small steel blade, a simple but strong tool, he wiped it clean and handed it to her. Nayeli took it carefully. Her fingers trembled not from weakness but from emotion she tried to hide. She met his eyes again. And this time, there was no fear in them. Only a deep, quiet softness. Before she could speak, John's ears caught a sound from outside. Boots on gravel. Hooves on dirt. Multiple riders approaching fast. Nayeli stiffened, every muscle tightening as she clutched the blade. John stepped toward the window, peering out into the dim night. Lantern light flickered in the distance. Voices carried on the wind. The hunters were closer than either of them expected. Nayeli looked ready to run again, ready to disappear back into the darkness even if it cost her life. But John raised a hand gently, signaling her to wait. He didn't know why he did it. He didn't know why he felt protective of a stranger he met only minutes ago. But something inside him whispered that letting her leave now meant sending her straight into danger she wouldn't escape. He turned to her and said quietly, "You're safe here. Don't go." Her breath caught, surprise widening her eyes. She hadn't heard those words in a long time. Without another thought, John guided her toward the loft above the workshop. She climbed quickly despite her injury, settling behind old blankets and tools. She moved like someone who had been hiding for months. Silent, quick, prepared. John stood below as the hunters rode closer, anger and pressure building in the air like a storm ready to break. He didn't know what he was about to do. He only knew one thing. He wasn't going to let them take her. Not from his workshop, not from his care, not while she looked at him with trust she had almost forgotten how to feel. From that night on, John Miller's quiet life would never be the same. Nayeli crouched behind the loft's old blankets, listening to the sounds outside. The wind brushed through the wooden slats of the workshop walls, carrying dust and the faint smell of iron. Her heart pounded. But it was not just fear. It was a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and something she did not want to name. For weeks, she had been running, hiding, surviving only by her wits and speed. And now, she was here, in a stranger's home, safe for the first time in what felt like months. John Miller moved quietly around the workshop, checking the doors and windows, his strong hands brushing against hammers and tools, preparing in case the hunters came too close. He had never been a man of violence, but tonight, something deep inside him stirred. The blacksmith who usually shaped metal and horseshoes for ranchers now realized that he might have to fight not for property, not for money, but for the life of someone he barely knew. And yet, he felt calm. There was no hesitation. Something about Nayeli made him willing to risk everything. Finally, the sounds of the riders faded as the hunters passed the workshop. John exhaled slowly, tension leaving his shoulders, but he did not speak. He did not want to break the fragile sense of safety that had settled over the room. Nayeli, still crouched in the loft, did not move immediately either. She was wary, trained by months of running and hiding to never relax completely. But she allowed herself a small moment to feel that perhaps, for a short while, she could breathe. "You could have just run," John said quietly, breaking the silence. He kept his voice low, careful not to carry it outside. Nayeli looked at him, her dark eyes wary but curious. "And go where? They would have followed me anywhere. I have no home to run back to," she said. Her voice was steady, but John noticed a tremor of tiredness beneath the words. She had carried the weight of months of pursuit on her shoulders, and it showed in every line of her face, every tense movement. John nodded, understanding more than she might have guessed. "You're safe here. For now. No one will get to you inside these walls," he said. There was no bravado in his voice, only a quiet confidence that came from years of living a simple, disciplined life. But even he could not predict what would happen in the days to come. Nayeli slowly lowered herself from the loft. The small steel blade he had forged clutched tightly in her hands. It was more than a weapon, it was a symbol of trust. She had carried it carefully, feeling the weight of it, knowing it might save her life. And yet, holding it also reminded her that she had not been entirely alone in her fight. This stranger, this blacksmith, had given her something more than steel. He had given her hope. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am a stranger. I bring danger. You don't even know my story, and yet you risk yourself." John paused. He did not have an easy answer. He had always lived quietly, avoiding trouble whenever possible. And yet, looking at Nayeli, seeing her strength, her courage, and her vulnerability, he felt something stir deep inside him. Perhaps it was the human need to protect someone in need. Perhaps it was the respect he felt for her will to survive. Or perhaps, he thought, it was simply the right thing to do. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "Maybe I just don't believe in letting people suffer when I can help. Maybe I just knew I couldn't let you face them alone." Nayeli studied him, searching his face for signs of deceit. But there were none. Only honesty, calm, and the quiet strength of a man who did not need to prove himself. Slowly, she nodded, understanding more than she had expected. They spent the night in silence, the only sounds being the soft crackle of the forge fire and the distant calls of coyotes outside. John worked on repairing some tools while Nayeli tended to her wounds, cleaning them carefully with water and cloth. The ritual was simple, yet intimate in a way neither expected. Words were few, but the shared effort created a bond that did not need to be spoken. By morning, the desert sun rose golden and hot, streaming through the cracks in the wooden walls. John had made a small breakfast of bread and fresh water, offering it to Nayeli. She accepted it, her hands shaking slightly, not from weakness, but from the realization that someone cared enough to prepare food for her without asking anything in return. As they ate, Nayeli began to speak more freely. She told John about her tribe, about her father, a respected healer who had taught her the ways of tracking, survival, and protection. She explained the raids that had been falsely blamed on her people, the injustice that had forced her to flee, and the nights spent sleeping under open skies, always alert to danger. John listened, captivated. He had heard stories of Native Americans in his youth, but never from someone who lived the truth of it. Someone who carried both the history and the present weight of survival. Nayeli spoke with quiet pride, despite her exhaustion, and John could not help but admire her. She had faced hardship, and yet had not lost her dignity or courage. Hours passed, and the desert heat grew intense. Nayeli cleaned the small blade John had forged for her, running her fingers along its edge, testing its balance. It was more than a weapon, it was a connection between them. Every strike of John's hammer had carried not just steel, but intention, protection, and trust. She realized, with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, that this man had given her more than a tool. He had given her a chance to survive another day, John watched her quietly, noting the care she took, the way she moved with a practiced grace. He did not speak. He did not need to. He understood that her silence was not coldness, but a form of respect, a recognition of what he had done for her. The calm was not to last. Late in the afternoon, distant shouts and the sound of hooves echoed across the desert floor. Nayeli stiffened immediately, her body tensing. She gripped the blade tightly, ready to move. John moved beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They're close," she whispered. "They must have realized I didn't leave." John nodded. "Then we prepare," he said. His voice was steady, unafraid. He guided her to a place where they could see the approach of any danger without being seen themselves. Together, they moved quietly, each understanding the unspoken rhythm of survival. The hunters approached, their voices rough and commanding, their intentions clear. Nayeli's breathing quickened, but she did not panic. John stayed beside her, a quiet presence that gave her courage. He had never faced men like this before, but he knew one thing. He would not let them harm her, if he could stop it. For hours, they watched, waiting for the right moment to act, neither speaking unless necessary. In the quiet tension of that afternoon, a bond grew between them. Nayeli realized she could trust him, perhaps for the first time in months, and John realized he would fight for her, not out of duty or pride, but because he could not imagine letting anyone face such danger alone. As the sun dipped low, painting the desert red and gold, they made a silent agreement. They would face whatever came together. Nayeli, with her skills and sharp mind, John, with his strength and calm determination. They were two strangers thrown together by circumstance, but something stronger than fear bound them, a shared understanding of courage, trust, and survival. That night, as the first stars appeared in the desert sky, Nayeli finally allowed herself to relax, even slightly. She was still alert, still cautious, but she no longer felt completely alone. And John, watching her for the first time with the quiet knowledge that he had done the right thing, felt a sense of purpose he had not known in years. In that small desert workshop, under the wide sky and the watchful eyes of the stars, two lives had intersected. One had fled from danger, and one had lived quietly, shaping steel and waiting for the next day. And now, together, they had a chance, however small, to face the future. Not as strangers, but as allies, each silently aware that the bond between them was stronger than the dangers they had already faced. The sun had barely set when the tension in the workshop thickened like desert dust after a storm. John could feel it in the air, and Nayeli sensed it more sharply than anyone. Every part of her was trained to pick up danger, the faint shift in wind, the new echo in the distance, the unnatural silence of the animals outside. She moved with a quiet alertness, her senses sharp, even though her body showed signs of exhaustion. John watched her from the corner of the room as she adjusted the small blade he had forged, sliding it into a handmade cloth sheath she tied around her waist. She moved carefully, making sure no sound escaped her actions. Even simple steps seemed deliberate and calm. He admired her focus, her discipline, and her strength, though he said nothing aloud. He was not used to speaking much. Most of his life had been hammers, fire, and silence. But now, silence felt heavier. It wasn't empty. It carried fear, urgency, and a strange bond forming between two people who had never expected to share even a single day together. The distant sound of horses finally broke the quiet. Nayeli froze. John stood straighter, putting a hand on the table for balance as if grounding himself. The sounds were still far but approaching steadily, too steadily to be travelers or ranchers heading home. These were hunters moving with direction. Nayeli took a deep breath and looked around the workshop, her eyes scanning every corner. "They're searching again," she whispered. Her voice was steady, but heavy with worry. "If they come here, they won't leave until they look through everything." John met her eyes, and something quietly firm settled in his chest. "Then, we won't let them," he said. There was no bravado, only determination. Nayeli studied him, surprised again by his resolve. She wondered how a man who had lived such a quiet life could display such courage without hesitation. But then she realized, courage didn't always grow in war. Sometimes it grew in hearts that had been alone too long, and finally found someone worth protecting. As the hoofbeats approached, John motioned for her to climb back into the loft. This time, she hesitated. She didn't want to hide while he faced danger alone. But John insisted, with a steady look and a quiet nod. "They won't trust me if they see you here," he said softly. "Let me handle this part." Nayeli slowly climbed up, her body tense, her mind racing. She crouched low between old sacks of nails and dusty wood planks, her hands gripping the edge of the loft. From here, she could see him clearly without being seen herself. The hunters stopped outside the workshop. Their boots thudded on the ground as they dismounted. A few rough voices carried through the thin wooden walls. John recognized one of them, a ranch hand from a nearby town, who often shared gossip while buying tools. But now his tone was different. Urgent. Angry. A heavy knock hit the front door. John opened it calmly, stepping into the warm lantern light so they could see his face clearly. The hunters stood in a loose group, dust covering their jackets, hats pulled low to hide their eyes. "Evanin, Miller," the lead hunter said, his voice sharp. "We're looking for that Apache fugitive again. Someone said they saw tracks near this area." John kept his expression relaxed, though Nayeli could see his shoulders stiffen slightly. "I've been working all day," he replied. "Haven't seen anyone pass through." The hunter narrowed his eyes. "Strange. Tracks lead right behind your workshop. You sure you ain't hiding someone?" Nayeli's muscles tightened. She clenched her jaw and gripped the small knife, ready to drop down if needed. But John stayed calm, leaning casually against the doorframe. "You're welcome to look around outside," he said, "but you won't find anyone." The hunter stared at him for a long moment, trying to detect a lie. John held his gaze without flinching. It wasn't bravery alone. John simply believed in what he was doing, and that belief made his voice steady. Finally, the hunter smirked. "You're a strange man, Miller. Always keep to yourself. Never know what quiet folks are hiding." John didn't react. He simply nodded and waited. The hunters turned away, circling the workshop, searching shadows and footprints. Nayeli watched every movement, her breath shallow. Her entire body was prepared to leap down if they tried to enter. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, the hunters regrouped. "Tracks fade after a few yards," one of them muttered. "Maybe we lost her in the rocks." The lead hunter spat into the dirt. "We'll head north. If she's hiding here, she won't get far." They mounted their horses, their voices fading as they rode away. The hoofbeats grew faint and eventually disappeared into the distance. John exhaled, shoulders dropping as he closed the door gently. For a moment, silence filled the workshop again. Then Nayeli slid down from the loft, landing softly on her feet. "You lied for me," she said quietly. John looked at her, surprised she needed to say it. "Of course," he replied. "You're not a threat to anyone. You don't deserve what they're trying to do to you." Nayeli walked closer, her eyes meeting his. She didn't speak. Something in her expression carried deep respect, something she rarely allowed herself to show. She touched the bandage on her arm, adjusting it carefully. It was a silent reminder that he had helped her before he even knew her story. "You risked yourself," she said finally. "Most people wouldn't," John shrugged gently. "Most people don't see the truth unless it stands right in front of them." Nayeli tilted her head slightly. "And what truth do you see?" He hesitated, but only for a moment. "I see someone who's tired, someone who's been wronged, someone who deserves a chance to breathe again." Her eyes softened. That softness was rare. It appeared only when she let her guard down. And right now, for reasons she didn't want to analyze, she felt safer than she had in months. They sat by the forge together, letting the warmth ease the cold fear that had settled in both their bones. John didn't ask her to talk, but she found herself wanting to. Slowly, she began to share pieces of her story, small pieces, the kind she usually kept hidden. She spoke of her tribe, of peaceful days collecting herbs with her father, of evenings spent listening to stories woven into the firelight. She spoke of the first accusation, of the ranchers who blamed her tribe without proof, and of the night she was forced to flee because someone needed a scapegoat, and she was the easiest target. John listened quietly, absorbing every word. He didn't interrupt or judge. He simply listened. Something she wasn't used to. It made her chest feel strangely light and heavy at the same time. When she finished, John looked at her and said, Nayeli let out a breath. A small, tired laugh escaping her lips. Strength is not always a choice. Sometimes, it is the only way to stay alive. John nodded, understanding. You don't have to face everything alone anymore. At least not tonight. His voice, steady and sincere, made something shift inside her. She wasn't sure what it was, but it warmed her in a way even the forge fire could not. As night deepened, the two of them moved around the workshop, preparing for the possibility that the hunters might return. John showed Nayeli the tools she could use, the exits she could take if needed. She moved beside him, studying each detail with careful attention. They worked like two halves of the same plan, silent, focused, united by necessity, and something deeper, growing quietly between them. Before resting for the night, Nayeli looked at him for a long moment. You gave me steel, she whispered softly. But you have given me something else, too. John looked confused. What's that? A place to stop running, she said. Even if only for a little while. He didn't respond with words. He didn't need to. The gentle way he handed her a blanket, the calm way he checked the doors again, the quiet presence he maintained, it all spoke for him. That night, under a sky full of cold stars, Nayeli slept for the first time without fear clawing at her throat. And John, sitting near the dying forge fire, realized that helping her was no longer a choice, it was something his heart demanded. Their lives had changed, and neither of them fully understood how deep the change would soon become. The next morning brought no peace. The sun rose bright and warm, lighting the desert in soft gold. But the calm was thin, almost fragile. Even the birds seemed quieter. John and Nayeli both sensed it, the hunters would return. People who chased for reward or pride did not give up easily. They would circle back, searching again, and this time, they would not stop at questions. John worked early at the forge, but his mind was not on metal. His hands shaped tools automatically, out of habit, but his thoughts stayed on the woman, sitting just outside his workshop, watching the horizon with sharp, quiet eyes. Nayeli sat still, one hand resting on the blade he had made, her posture calm but alert. Every few moments, she glanced toward the hills, as if she could feel danger before seeing it. You didn't sleep much, John said gently as he cooled a heated bar of iron. She gave a small nod. Sleep comes only when the world is safe, she replied softly. Last night was the first time in many weeks I felt almost safe. But my body has not forgotten how to stay awake. I'm Azia. John looked at her, noticing the faint dark circles beneath her eyes, the way her shoulders relaxed but never fully dropped. He wished he could give her a place where danger could not follow. But he only had this workshop, this small corner of the world made of wood, iron, and fading quiet. You don't have to keep watch alone, he said. Nayeli's eyes met his. There was warmth there, a soft gratitude she rarely allowed herself to show. And you don't have to protect me, she answered. But you do. Before he could reply, she suddenly stood, her body stiffening like a drawn bow. John heard it too this time, the distant rumble of horses. A slow, heavy rhythm, not fast, not a rush, but an approach filled with intention. They're coming, Nayeli whispered. John wiped his hands on a cloth and stepped outside beside her. The desert stretched wide and open before them. In the distance, small shapes moved riders, just far enough that their faces couldn't be seen, but close enough to stir dust clouds. They found my trail, she said softly. They won't leave without searching everything today. John felt something settle inside him, not fear, but a decision. He turned to her. "We won't run," he said. "If we prepare now, we can stop them from entering." "Are you sure?" she asked. "This is your home. You don't have to fight my battles." He shook his head. "You're not a battle. You're a person who deserves fairness. And this is my home. I choose what happens here." For a moment, Nayeli simply looked at him, her expression shifting with emotion. She didn't speak aloud. She nodded slowly, understanding what his words meant. A quiet partnership had formed between them. Not planned, not spoken, but strong. Together they moved around the workshop, preparing as best they could. John showed her places the hunters might try to enter, and where they could block the doors from inside. He handed her a heavier tool, a steel rod shaped like a short staff, while he kept a hammer at his side. They set a few simple traps outside, not harmful ones, but enough to slow the hunters or confuse them. Nayeli worked in silence, but her movements were smooth and sure. She had trained her whole life to defend, to track, to protect her people. Now she used those skills to help John, to help herself, and to stand her ground instead of running again. As they worked, the sound of the approaching horses grew louder. Nayeli paused and looked at John. "If things get dangerous, I want you to stay behind me," she said. He shook his head. "We stand together." She hesitated, then accepted his answer with a small nod. Moments later, the hunters arrived. Their horses kicked dust into the air as they circled the workshop, trying to corner whatever or whoever they believed was inside. The lead hunter rode forward and shouted, "Miller, we're searching your place today. We won't ask twice." John stepped out into the open. "You already searched yesterday. You didn't find anyone because there's no one here causing trouble." The hunter narrowed his eyes. "People lie. Trails don't. Tracks go straight toward your workshop again." Nayeli stood behind the doorway, listening, ready to move if needed. She felt a knot tighten in her chest. She didn't want John to put himself in danger because of her. She didn't want anyone to suffer because she had been blamed for something she didn't do. Yet here he was, standing calmly before these men, refusing to turn her over. "This is still my property," John insisted. "You don't enter unless I allow it." The hunter smirked. "We'll enter if we feel like it. You gonna stop us?" Nayeli could sense the tension rising. She stepped out from behind the doorway before John could stop her, holding the blade he had made for her. The sunlight caught the steel, making it shine. The hunters froze in surprise. "So you were hiding her," one of them said. Nayeli stood tall, her chin raised, her face calm. "I hid myself," she corrected. "He only gave me water and kindness." The lead hunter's eyes hardened. "You're coming with us." "No," she replied quietly. The hunters dismounted, approaching slowly, their hands resting on their belts. But even without touching anything, the message was clear. They planned to force her. John stepped forward until he stood beside Nayeli. His voice was steady. "You're not taking her." The hunter scoffed. "You're just a blacksmith, Miller. You don't want to make this messy." "I make things strong," John replied, "including my decisions." For a brief moment, time seemed to hold still. The wind stopped. The dust settled. Nayeli and John stood side by side, facing men who believed fear would make them surrender. But Nayeli had lived through far worse than this, and John had discovered a courage inside himself he never knew he carried. The first hunter stepped forward. Nayeli moved lightly, her body shifting into a defensive stance. She didn't strike. She simply blocked his path, her movements smooth, controlled, confident. John stepped beside her with his hammer raised, not to harm anyone, but to show he would not be pushed aside. The hunters paused. Their plan was simple: grab a tired, worn woman. They had not expected a quiet blacksmith to stand in front of her like a wall. "You really want trouble, Miller?" the lead hunter asked, frustration growing in his voice. John met his stare, unwavering. "I want fairness," he said. "If you have proof she did something wrong, show it. If not, Leave us alone." For a long, tense moment, everyone stood still. Nayeli's breath was steady. John's grip was firm. The hunters exchanged uncertain glances. They had expected fear, but they had found resolve. Finally, the lead hunter let out a long breath. "Fine. We'll be back," he said. But his words lacked the force they carried before. "But this doesn't end here." They mounted their horses and rode away, slower this time, casting backward glances of irritation and confusion. When the last echo of hoofbeats faded, Nayeli let out a breath she had been holding. It felt like releasing weeks of fear. John lowered his hammer and looked at her. She looked back at him, eyes soft, filled with emotion. She didn't speak. "You stood with me," she whispered. John nodded. "I told you. You don't have to face everything alone." For the first time since they met, Nayeli's shoulders relaxed fully. The sun warmed her face, and a faint smile touched her lips, small, tired, but real. "You gave me steel," she said quietly. "But today, you gave me something stronger." John didn't ask what she meant. He understood. Their bond had grown beyond kindness, beyond fear, beyond circumstance. They walked back into the workshop together, two people who had chosen to stand side by side, knowing the storm was not finished but trusting that together they could withstand it. The hours after the hunters left felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, not safe, but quiet in a heavy way, like the world was taking a deep breath before the next storm. Nayeli sat near the forge with her hands resting lightly on her knees. John stood at the doorway, staring out at the fading sunlight. Neither spoke for a long time, but neither needed to. They both understood the danger was not gone. They had pushed back the hunters once, maybe even shaken their confidence, but people who chased for reward did not simply give up. They would return with a new plan, perhaps with more numbers, perhaps with colder intentions. When the sun dipped behind the red hills and the light turned orange, Nayeli stood and walked to John. Her steps were soft, and her eyes held a mixture of gratitude and a quiet sadness. "You know they'll come back," she said. John nodded. "I know. And next time," she continued, "they might not listen. They will push harder." He turned to her. "I'm not afraid of them." Nayeli looked at him with gentle seriousness. "You should be. They don't see truth. They only see what they want to believe." John sighed. He rubbed his hands together as if trying to warm them, though the forge behind them was still hot enough to heat the whole room. "Maybe so," he said, "but I see the truth. And the truth is, you don't deserve to be hunted." Her eyes softened. That softness always took her by surprise. She had spent so long being strong that moments of kindness still felt unfamiliar. She stepped closer, placing a hand lightly against the wooden doorframe. "I don't want you harmed because of me," she whispered. He shook his head. "Then stay, and we'll face whatever comes." The words settled between them like a promise neither had spoken before. That night, they made a small meal together. It wasn't fancy, just warm bread and water, but it felt comforting. They sat beside each other, talking quietly. Nayeli spoke about her village before all the trouble began, the children who laughed as they chased each other among the sagebrush, the elders who told stories by the fire, her father who taught her to read the signs of the desert. John listened, imagining a world completely different from his own yet filled with the same kind of simple joys he once knew. When she finished, John shared a few memories of his own. His mother teaching him how to shape metal when he was a boy. His father guiding him on long rides through open fields. He didn't talk about the loneliness that came later. He didn't need to. Nayeli could see it in his eyes, just as he could see the weight of her months on the run. The moon rose high, bright, and clear, lighting the desert in silver. They stepped outside for fresh air, and for a moment, everything felt still. The sky stretched endlessly above them. The world felt wide, quiet, and beautiful, but the peace did not last. Just before dawn, the sound of horses returned, this time louder, faster, more certain. Nayeli woke instantly. John, already half awake, grabbed his boots and hurried to the window. Dust clouds approached from the hills. More riders than before. They brought more men, Nayeli whispered. John felt a tight knot form in his chest, but he didn't hesitate. Then we protect this place, he said. Together. They moved quickly. Nayeli checked the exits and grabbed the steel tools they had prepared. John secured the doors, reinforced the windows, and positioned himself near the front. The hunters stopped outside, and the leader's voice boomed through the early morning air. Miller, we're ending this today. Bring the woman out, or we come in. John opened the front door only a crack, enough to speak but not enough for anyone to see inside. She didn't harm anyone, he said firmly. If you want to accuse someone, find real proof. The leader spat on the ground. We don't need proof. We just need her. Those words made Nayeli step forward. She stood behind John, tall and calm, her eyes steady. Then take me, she said. But leave him out of this. John turned sharply. No, you don't go anywhere. Her eyes met his warm, gentle, but full of stubborn strength. I won't let you fight my battles alone. The leader saw the exchange and smirked. Touching, he said. But this ends now. He signaled his men, and they began moving toward the workshop. Nayeli stepped out into the light, blade at her side, ready to defend herself. John stepped beside her. Holding a hammer, they faced the hunters together, not backing up even a step. The first hunter tried to rush forward, but Nayeli moved swiftly, not hurting him, but stepping into his path, blocking his advance with calm confidence. John used his hammer to knock aside another man's arm, not striking anyone, just showing he would not be pushed aside. The hunters hesitated again. They had expected fear, not a united front. The leader tried to push forward. But before he could reach them, a new sound echoed across the desert hooves, approaching from the opposite direction. A small group of Apache riders appeared on the ridge, moving fast toward the workshop. Nayeli's breath caught in her throat. She recognized the man at the front, an elder from her tribe, someone who had been searching for her. The hunters froze, unsure what to do. The Apache riders stopped between the workshop and the hunters, creating a barrier. The elder dismounted and walked toward Nayeli, his eyes filled with relief. We found the ones who caused the raids, he said to her. They tried to blame us, but the truth came out. You are free. Nayeli's eyes softened with deep emotion, relief, gratitude, and a weight lifting off her shoulders. But she didn't look at the elder for long. Her eyes drifted back to John. The elder turned to the hunters. You chased the wrong person. Leave, now. The hunters, outnumbered and outmatched, retreated quickly. Their pride was wounded, but they were not foolish enough to stay. Within minutes, they rode away, disappearing into the dusty horizon. Silence settled again. A different kind of silence. One that felt bright instead of heavy. Nayeli turned to John slowly. There was no fear in her expression now, no worry. Only warmth. Only truth. You gave me strength when I had none, she said softly. You gave me steel. But you gave me more than that. You gave me a place to breathe. John looked at her, unsure what to say. But his heart felt full in a way it had not felt in many years. The elder watched the two quietly. He approached John and nodded with respect. You helped one of ours. That will not be forgotten. Nayeli stepped closer to John, her voice soft enough that only he could hear. I am free now. I can return home. My tribe will welcome me. But, John felt his breath catch. But, she smiled gently, a smile filled with both certainty and emotion. My heart has found another home too. Here. With you. John couldn't speak. His throat tightened. He never expected anyone to say such words to him, especially someone as strong and brave as her. Nayeli reached out and took his hand. You stood with me when no one else would. So now, John Miller, I choose to stay by your side. She spoke it simply, without dramatic force, just as a truth she was ready to live. John held her hand, feeling warmth spread through him. In that moment, he understood something he had never realized before. Loneliness had shaped him, but connection could rebuild him. Nayeli stayed. Not because she needed refuge anymore, but because she wanted a life with the man who had given her hope. Together, they rebuilt the quiet forge into a place filled with laughter, warmth, shared stories, and new beginnings. The blacksmith who once lived alone and the woman who had once been hunted now lived side by side, shaping not just steel, but a future they chose together. And that was the strongest thing either of them had ever created.